Welcome to today's webinar, The Importance of a Geographic Approach to Planning, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, supported by the US EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website at smartgrowth.org that provides information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The Clearinghouse provides information to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is also the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. We are recording this webinar and will be posting it on our website under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to learn about our upcoming webinars. The views expressed by the speaker in this webinar are those of the speaker and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association, as well as 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is The Importance of a Geographic Approach to Planning. You can also search for event number 9256057. So today our speaker is Keith Cooke. Keith is the Industry Manager for Planning and Community Development at Esri. A graduate of Auburn University, he's been a GIS professional since 1994 and has worked for planning and community development agencies at the regional and municipal level. Prior to this role, he was an account executive at Esri, working with more than 100 local governments. He is a frequent speaker at GIS, community planning, and economic development events, and is an active member of the American Planning Association, where he has conducted more than 100 hands-on GIS workshops for planners at the National Planning Conference and at state chapter conferences. Following his presentation, Keith will answer as many questions as time permits. As always, you can submit a question anytime by using the questions tool located in the control panel on the right side of your screen. And as always, we're going to start with a couple polls. Our first one is the one that you've probably answered before if you've been here previously, which is just asking where you live or work. And you can see the options on your screen. If you're having any difficulty responding to this poll, you may need to exit from full screen mode. And we'll give you about 45 seconds or a minute here to get responses in, then we'll share that, and then share one other poll before we go to Keith. And thanks to everybody for being with us today. And thanks to Keith as well. Give you a couple more seconds to respond. So today's audience, self-reported at least 34% are in the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, 23% in the South, 18% in the Midwest, 16% in the West, and 9% outside the US. One other poll for you today, and that is, how do you use GIS in your office? And you have 5 options here. I use a professional desktop program. I primarily use web-based apps. I task it to another staff member. I don't have access to GIS now, or other. And you can select one of these, and again, we'll give about a minute or so for folks to respond. And again, thanks for being with us today. Give you all a few more seconds. Okay, the response to this question is 43% use a professional desktop program, 22% task it to another staff member, 17% use primarily web-based apps, 13% don't have access to GIS now, and 5% other. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Keith Cooke. Welcome, Keith.
Michael, thank you so much. Very happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity from the Maryland Department of Planning and from the Smart Growth Network. I've got to admit that that really surprised me, the last poll. I thought the numbers would be a little bit higher on the web-based applications, but very interesting to see that. So again, I want to echo Michael's thanks for this. I know you're busy. We've got a little over 800 online right now. And so we're going to discuss, again, the importance of the geographic approach to planning. This has really come about from, honestly, from years of work. And one of the benefits I have in my position here is I've gotten to visit with planning departments from coast to coast. And it's really been interesting, from, large cities to, small villages and so forth, and everything in between. And I've yet to find two that really do everything exactly the same. Although if you put a list together of what they struggle with, there's a pretty consistent list, and especially now in the day and age that we're at. And so what I wanted to do was put together something that would emphasize the importance. Again, my background is in planning and in GIS management, which I highly recommend at any city, because if you hold both roles, between the two, you can probably be blamed for just about everything that goes on in the city, in some form or fashion. But one of the things, so with that, with those struggles that they're dealing with in mind, again, everything about planning is influenced to varying degrees by location. In fact, planning's most infamous acronym is NIMBY, right? It's not in my backyard. And so the importance of that acronym is, it's not what the project is, it's as much as where the project is, right? I don't necessarily hate the project, I just don't want it near me or in this specific location. And so being able to understand location and geography and how to analyze it and what our opportunities are there is really the driving force for this presentation, and really a series of presentations that I've done on this. So let's go ahead and get started with this, and let me move on to the next slide. I want to provide just a little bit of context first to this, and one is that the first aspect is that planning doesn't, this isn't news to anyone that works in planning, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So in my last job, when I had to do site reviews or subdivision reviews and so forth, yes, I would sign off on it, but then there were 4 other departments or 5 other departments that had to review it and put their signatures on it as well. So my opinion mattered, but it wasn't the only one. And so we had multiple people, multiple departments, in addition to the public, as well as elected and appointed officials that were all part of that overall process. And so GIS is key here because it helps provide that interconnection between our communities, not just within people within our planning department, but also within the multiple departments within a city or a county or a regional office, or within within a private firm. And GIS provides the technology for us to input information and the sciences to be able to analyze that information, to be able to see what the impact of our human activities, of our day-to-day lives, and the things that we would like to do, the projects we would like to create and so forth, what those impacts would be. And more than anything, it really helps create understanding. That's the key. Information is one thing, data is one thing, getting to understanding is really the goal, and GIS helps us do that. If you've been to any Esri, really any kind of GIS user group meeting over the last maybe 10 to 15, maybe longer years, you've probably seen a slide similar to this, because we talk about a framework when it comes to working in GIS. But really, the reason why I love this and the reason why I still use it is it pertains to planning as well. And in particular, planning and GIS when you combine them. So think about this as a framework. When we have a site review that comes in, or a subdivision review, or a proposed rezoning, right? That's data that's coming in. We have to manage that data. We have to measure it. We need to be able to map it and then visualize it. We need to be able to analyze it either by running it through models or operating simple tools to be able to see things like line of sight analysis or shadow impact. We can now use GIS, and we're going to see more about this in a little bit. GIS is becoming more prevalent in the actual design of communities. So it's being used in scenario planning. And again, we're going to see some examples of this down the road. But then once we've created our designs, and in many cases, multiple designs, right, that are that measure the metrics of each of those scenarios, we bring this before the public, before elected and appointed officials, so that decision making can take place, and then we can take action. GIS is involved in every facet of this framework, right? And so that's why I keep harping on this, is because it helps provide that data-driven approach. And you're going to hear me say that, well, honestly, ad nauseum throughout this presentation. But the thing you have to understand and why this is so important is because this data-driven approach is important, so that when we present our ideas, when we do the mapping and the analysis and the planning, and we present this to the public, we present it as a good idea, not because Keith says it's a good idea or Michael says it's a good idea. It's a good idea because it provides these specific metrics, right? That our residents are hoping for. And again, moving away from more of the anecdotal process and then moving towards data-driven work. The good news is, I want to tell you this: if you work in planning, and you're one of the people that says, I really don't use GIS, I might feel I'm a little behind in that regard. The good news is that planners have already been using GIS for a long time. So you're not really, whatever project you think you want to undertake, I can almost guarantee you it's not unique, and that some other planner has already used GIS for that very type of project. So in the past, when planners wanted to use, so I say past, I should probably put context to that. Let's say 10, 15, 20 years ago, planners that wanted to use GIS, pretty much the only option that they had was a desktop tool, right? Like something like an ArcGIS, like ArcMap, and now ArcGIS Pro, and had to be able to have a beefy laptop or tower, mini tower, to be able to run it. Maybe take a week or two for training, and that's just to be able to get started with it. And the problem is, for a planner, that's a big investment in time, not just money in the machines and so forth, but that's a big investment in time for learning something that is where you may only carve out 10% of that functionality to do what you need to do on a daily basis, right? So identify who the surrounding property owners for a rezoning would be, or understand a breakdown of land uses by area, things of that nature. And so what we're seeing more and more of is this evolution of web-based GIS and web-based applications that provide simple functionality. And again, we're going to take a deeper dive into this. But the thing I want you to take away from this slide is that planners have already been using this, and there are you're probably not, if you're worried about undertaking a new project, you're probably not the first to have done that. So with that, I thought what would be really helpful, and I've found this is really true, is not just me talking about it, but showing some real life uses of planners that are using GIS. So I wanted to provide four really good examples. And so one is in Tacoma, Washington. So like many other cities, right, they're dealing with changes in needs for their housing policies. And so they created what they called the Home in Tacoma project, and it was an action strategy geared towards creating more affordable housing. And so to enable this, instead of forcing folks to go to town meetings or to public hearings, they provided a web-based application to really leverage civic inclusion, so that the public could go in, identify their neighborhood, and say, oh, within my neighborhood, here's the type of housing that exists. This is what I would like to see. Here's what we're lacking. We need a grocery store nearby, or we need more affordable housing. We need more middle housing, more townhomes, things of that nature in our area, so that the planning department wasn't just working off of their preconceived notions, they were actually getting genuine feedback from their residents, right? And so from that, they were able to create these goals, such as, again, how do we increase housing affordability, put together data to help back up their housing policy. Speaking of housing, in the city of Charlotte, they have created, their planning department has implemented what they call their Equitable housing framework. And again, GIS is a key component of this. The thing that I love about what they're doing is that instead of the traditional clustering of affordable housing, they want to be able to spread this evenly throughout the dozens of neighborhoods within Charlotte. So that it's, again, a more equitable approach to housing affordability. So the maps on the right there are really a conglomeration of data that shows proximity to resources such as jobs, education, transit, housing affordability, and so forth. So that, again, the planning department, as they're creating this, they can go forth and say, this isn't a good idea just because we say it is, it's a good idea because of these numbers, right? And so again, it's something that they can better present to the public, to the stakeholders and developers, I should say, and then the elected and appointed officials. I love this story. This is, we talked about planning and design. Well, this is for the village of Glen Ellen, Illinois, and Glen Ellen's a smaller town. And they were looking at a change of use for a property. They were looking at, again, in an area where they have older buildings, very established architectural standards. There was a proposed development for a 5-story mixed-use development. That's big news for a village, that size, right? This is a big change. And so to be able to help visualize this information, they use, this is one of our business partners, their work, Housel Levine Associates out of Chicago. And they created this immersive 3D development viewer so that the public would be able to see not only the existing conditions, but what the proposed development would look like. And not just in a vacuum, but in context to the rest of the buildings and the rest of the downtown area, right? So that it's, again, there wasn't guessing or sketch work and so forth. It looked real, right? And so this was again, a very repeatable solution an award-winning solution, actually, for that matter, that Housel Levine put together for the village. So again, I love seeing things like this because it really opens the public's eye and makes them feel like they are more involved in the process in planning. And then finally, the last one, this story has really fascinated me for the better part of a year. So at the city of Seattle, like many cities, they are dealing with housing capacity issues, right? There's not enough housing for everyone that wants to be there. And of course, when, basic economics that we learned in high school and college, right? If the capacity or the supply is not where it needs to be, it's going to drive costs up, especially when there's the demand that there is. So in an initiative that was brought forth by the mayor and then run by the Office of Planning and Community Development, there was a big push for accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, within Seattle. And so the way that they chose to be able to communicate this to the public was through an ArcGIS Hub site called ADUniverse. I think we're going to share that, we'll share that URL with you, but that you can take a look at. But this made it available to the public. So again, from my house, I can go in, I can understand, okay, what are ADUs? What does that really mean? I can identify my property with a simple property search tool and be able to see instantly, am I approved to be able to build a detached ADU or an attached ADU on my property? If so, there's a link there for pre-approved ADUs that were designed by local architects. The architects made those available, and then if you like that as a property owner, you find a design that you want, that's already approved by the planning department, you just purchase that license from the architect, and you can literally, get the process started from your house to be able to implement an ADU. So the benefit here is as more and more houses, start adding ADUs, you increase housing capacity, which in turn helps lower costs and make housing more affordable as well. And also generates additional revenue for property owners. That's not a bad thing either. So to me, this ADUniverse is an amazing use and a very modern use of GIS technology, certainly not a traditional one, but it's something that is really really being embraced at the city of Seattle. Okay, so again, I always love showing those examples because I think it helps sometimes to see, oh, this is, this is what the city is doing. We have a similar project. And it's always good to see that someone else has broken the ice and you don't necessarily have to do that from scratch. So let's take a deeper dive then into this geographic approach. What does this mean then for planners to be able to implement this geographic approach so that we can implement some of the ideas that that we saw earlier? I hate even mentioning the pandemic because we're all tired of hearing about it, but one of the things that has that was definitely a byproduct of it is that as many planning departments were unable to meet in person at their office, they, sometimes Zoom meetings or Teams meetings weren't very effective. A lot of things got pushed to the back burner. And so we saw things like comprehensive plan updates, lots of comp plans that needed updates, got tabled and it got tabled and it got tabled. And so we're seeing a lot of communities really kind of scrambled to get these done. I just got back last week from the Florida Planning Conference and spoke with a lot of planners who were going through this exact same thing. And there's, we're playing catch up for, what happened for the better part of 2 years. So as comp plans are being updated, what a lot of cities and counties are having to deal with is understanding, okay, the comp plan that we had from 10, 20 years ago is obsolete in the sense that it's not really addressing the housing concerns, the modern housing concerns, I should say, of our residents today. The needs of our community back then were different from what they are now. And so we're seeing a big push for zoning reform, right? To be able to accommodate these updated housing policies. You have a lot of zoning codes that are, that were built in the 70s, 80s, earlier than that. Again, that were fine at that time because they were dealing with a specific, dealing with the specific needs of their residents, but the residents' needs are changing over time. And so we're seeing more folks that say, yes, some would like single family residential, but we're seeing more and more that would like denser developments where they are closer or within a walkable distance to work, to educational facilities, to transit, and so forth. So we're seeing different demands than we had 10, 20, 30 years ago. So again, a real challenge for communities to be able to deal with this. We're also seeing a lot of them having to deal with how they improve public participation. So I joke about this a lot. My last job in planning, public participation was, if you were petitioning for a rezoning, we put that really attractive sign in your yard with the zoning code on there, put an ad in the paper and said, we'll see you Tuesday at 7 p.m. right, for the planning commission meeting. Can't wait to see you because I'm sure you have nothing better to do than to come in and sit and listen to this. And so we weren't really good at handing out, at really dispersing information, useful information to the public. And, it basically labeled you as if you weren't at the planning commission meeting Tuesday at 7, you didn't care about what was going on in your community. We know that's a ridiculous assumption now, right? Just because you can't go to that meeting or have other things to do doesn't mean you don't care about your neighborhood. So being able to have improved public participation through a number of different ways, through the web, through mobile devices, right? In making sure that you've got genuine civic inclusion. That's one of the, again, one of the challenges that people are dealing with. Again, I mentioned before that when we looked at our, our earlier days of GIS, it was a painful process for a lot of planners to get up to speed on, and that's why many of them would task that work off to a GIS person, which is fine. I used to be that person that got the tasks, but in my early days of GIS, the problem was I really didn't understand a whole lot about planning. So I wasn't the subject matter expert, and a lot of times there would be quite a bit that could be lost in translation from the planner to me. Now that changed over time as I became more aware of because I made a lot of mistakes. Let's go with that. But by learning, we alleviated a lot of that. But here's the core of the issue, is that the planner is the subject matter expert. So wherever possible, the planner should be using GIS to be able to implement their workflows, to be able to do their analysis, to be able to visualize and map and to design, right? And so we do that today through a series of applications. And if we went around, if we went around and took a poll about what your favorite app is on your phone, the one thing that they would probably have in common is that they do pretty much one thing and they do it really well. They don't try to do 50 different things and so forth. And so really these apps that are out there follow that same model. They do one or two things at the most very well, and they address a workflow. Again, creating a buffer around a proposed rezoning to identify property owners that have to be notified, identifying proximity to a wetlands buffer or setback and things of that nature. Right. So the benefit here is that, again, this isn't putting GIS managers out of business. It's quite the opposite. It's actually making them more important than ever, but it's putting GIS functionality in the hands of planners. And that's what these apps really provide, is it opens up access to the subject matter expert for that work. Again, without having to get the beefy machine, without having to take a week, even multiple days of training, and really even without making the investment in software. Much of this is just software as a service. All right, so let's take a look then at really these 5 components to this geographic approach. The first one is we have to understand neighborhood characteristics. Richard Saul Wurman, who's the founder of TED Talks, so forth, has a great phrase where he talked about, a map provides understanding, and understanding precedes action. We have to have understanding before we can move forward, right? So within the GIS framework, this is a couple of different apps. There's the ArcGIS Business Analyst Web App, ArcGIS Community Analyst. There are other applications out there as well, but really the purpose of this is to be able to understand what's going on in our neighborhood. So within the Business Analyst Web App, this actually gives you access to about 2,000 different variables of information. Now, a lot of that's the census and ACS, but a lot of that is also information from a company called DataAxle that provides spending and behavioral information and job information and so forth. So being able to understand, what the needs are within a community. What are their proximities to grocery stores or electronic stores or libraries, what have you, right? Being able to understand that information. So just to give you some context as far as what you're seeing here in the top left, we can establish service areas for proposed businesses, right? Being able to understand a 5, 10, or 3, 5, and 10-minute drive time from a proposed office. Being able to do demographic mapping. I'm based here in Birmingham. This is a map that I created that combined 2 variables showing the housing affordability index and the median household income. So showing where there is higher income or lower income, and then higher affordability or lower affordability, right? So we move beyond just simple maps. We can actually take some deep dives into analysis. And then from that, we can generate reports and infographics that we can share with others. We can demonstrate our Tapestry segmentation, which is a fantastic tool. This is available for free. You can go to esri.com/tapestry to be able to see it. But this is where every block group in America is actually categorized into one of 67 different categories. And this shows things like their socioeconomic traits, what their housing traits are, where do they make their money, what do they work in, what's the racial breakdown, where do other similar neighborhoods exist. So what's really interesting is that you've got a lot of commercial companies like Starbucks and Wendy's and Walgreens and hundreds of others that use this kind of data to be able to identify where they're going to site stores, right? So based off these this market data, and then being able to have access to detailed business data. Again, really useful from a planning standpoint in terms of being able to understand where are my food deserts. I can do this by identifying where my grocery stores are, and then doing a walk time buffer from that, or even a drive time if I wanted to understand, okay, how many people are within this service area, And if we were to put a new store in this location, how many additional people could be served, right? So again, this helps us understand what's going on first and foremost. Next step in this process is really being able to derive business intelligence from the existing systems already at work within a planning department. When you say business system and planning, your immediate thought is almost always to permitting, because that's really the system of record in most planning departments, which is perfectly understandable, right? And permitting, of course, goes across just planning. It's used by other departments, but it's really the system of record for the most part. So Esri does not have a permitting system, and I don't think we're ever going to create one. So because we have some great partners that do this, and there are tons of permitting solutions in there. So this is neither an endorsement nor an indictment of any permitting system. But a lot of times you have a select group of people who are using or entering information into the permitting system. The reality is that everyone within planning, the elected officials, appointed officials, and so forth would benefit from understanding about the data that's in there. So what tools like ArcGIS Insights can provide is it can generate real business intelligence from this system, right? So being able to take a deeper dive into huge amounts of data. So this information here, this is very timely. I'm showing Montgomery County, Maryland. So this was actually data that was available on Montgomery County's open data site. I did this, I think like 3 years ago. And basically it was their commercial permitting data, and it was available as a spreadsheet. This is not an indictment of Montgomery County, Maryland. They are an outstanding users of GIS, but this was just available in their open data. My contention would be, okay, you have a spreadsheet of commercial permits, who can use that unless you know exactly what you're using this for? So what Insights allows me to do is to take that data, literally drag and drop it into my program, into my workspace here, and then be able to create things like charts, maps of where the developments are occurring. Here you can see my permit status, right? How many are finalized, how many were issued, how many are open, how many stop work, situations do we have, what kind of developments have been made, like mostly business development, some townhouses, restaurants, and so forth. How does that trend look over time? And because, again, this is not traditional GIS by any stretch, it's business intelligence, but you can have a geographic approach to it as well. So I can also overlay, say, the county commission or the county council districts on top of this, and be able to break this down by county council district and be able to show, okay, of the 5 districts, where's the most development occurring? How has that changed over the last few years, right? And what kind of developments are we seeing? What's the value of those developments? Again, how does that compare to last year, 5 years ago, and so forth? Again, all data that's really being stored in a permitting system, but a lot of times you've got to be able to find a way to extract that information out and answer those big picture questions. That's what business intelligence is really geared towards doing. And then the other aspect are these ArcGIS solutions that provide, again, what we talked about before, simple, focused web applications that do one or two things, right? So a citizen problem reporter to allow the public to be able to identify graffiti or illegal dumping sites or abandoned vehicles, being able to help mitigate blight, to be able to, again, do buffers for proposed rezonings and so forth. So those are available. And the benefit of ArcGIS Solutions is they're free. They're part of the platform. So we have over 100 applications. Actually, I'm sorry, 150 applications at this point. They're all open source. So you actually have access to the code. They're all configurable and they're covered by technical support as well. So again, number of different free focused applications to help, again, generate business intelligence. The benefit here is that you are generating more value from what you've already got. And I guarantee you, I can almost guarantee you, your planning department has spent way more on permitting probably than they have on GIS. This is a way to be able to generate more value from that permitting system. The third step is generating sustainable policy development. And so the thing that I really like seeing, and that is a trend that I've really noticed over the past 10 years, is planners are getting more and more involved in big picture policy development. And so this is especially true now with the housing crisis that we're dealing with. More and more city and county leaders are looking to planners to be able to say, okay, what can we do to help alleviate this. So one of the tools that Esri has created, this is part of the Esri Living Atlas. This is a free application. It's Esri Maps for Public Policy. And you can see the URL on the screen. It's esri.com/policy maps. But what this is it's curated content. It's already made for you. So you can actually look at data that's already been created for you. For instance, this is looking in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, looking at people that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and it differentiates whether they're owners or renters, right? So being able to get, again, this is all part of the understanding, but again, helping us to drive policy. Does this policy that where we're pushing affordable housing, does it make sense? Is this the neighborhood that really needs it? That's what this really helps us drive towards. So again, this works on its own, or it can be integrated into your desktop applications or other web apps if you so choose, and shared with other people. And then again, we mentioned this before as well, the supporting civic inclusion, right? So this is really the evolution of public engagement or community engagement. And so if you'll indulge me for just a minute, I'm going to get on my soapbox about open data. Probably about 10, maybe 12 years ago, there was a huge push, especially amongst city and county leadership. It was like a wave for open data. And by the way, this is a great thing, right? Cities were understanding we have a ton of data. There are some people that are asking for it. It's kind of difficult, and depending on the department that you go to get to it, we should make open data available for our city. And again, most people are like, yes, that's great. Accountability, transparency, we should do that. The problem is that a lot of cities and counties are like, yes, we're going to make this warehouse available. And instead of maybe organizing the data in a way that would make sense, it was just kind of like they opened up the warehouse and said, okay, public, go get it. And there was a lot of data available, but there was no context driven to it. So you had to know specifically what you were looking for. And then you had to maybe have an application to be able to open it. How could you do analysis on it? One city that I worked with stored all of their 311 calls in a spreadsheet. No map, just a spreadsheet. And unless you knew specifically what you were looking for, there was no way to really be, or unless you were an expert in Excel, there was no way to really get any value out of that. So one of the things that's happened over time is we've started to see a more initiative-driven approach to open data. So it's, yes, we have open data, but we're going to focus it on this initiative on housing capacity, right? That's what ADUniverse is doing, right? It's making open data available, but it's focusing what is available and how it can be used. So not just a list of data that's available, but an application where you can actually do something useful with it. On the top right, that's Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This app looks so simple, but one of the reasons why I love it is it shows proposed subdivision and land developments and goes back about 5 or 6 years as well. So if you're a new resident to the county, you can look and see, oh, I see that they proposed a similar development 3 years ago. Let's see what happened with that, right? Or if you're a newly elected official or newly appointed official, this is a great way to be able to understand, hey, what happened in the past year? What's happened in this neighborhood, right? So instead of relying on anecdotal information, it's all right there for you. And then the City of Providence also has a neighborhood snapshots, again, a way to be able to help connect the many neighborhoods within Providence by allowing, again, elected officials, the public, whoever, to be able to click and have an understanding of what's going on within those neighborhoods. What's the percentage of population that's in poverty? What's the median home value there? How many vacant units are we dealing with, right? So again, being able to get a better sense of understanding and be able to get feedback from the public. And then the last aspect of this is how we empower scenario planning and design. And again, to me, this is one of the fastest growing facets of this geographic approach to planning, is that now planners, again, without being GIS experts, can come up and design developments the way that they want. So think about it from the standpoint of how you typically, if you're in planning, how you typically deal with a site review or a subdivision plan that's sent to you by a developer. You are completely reactionary based on what they've sent you, right? And so you can make markups to it and say, well, this is too close to the setbacks. I'm not sure that this is the right design for this neighborhood, and so forth. Now take that a step further. Now, instead of just that markup, now design that development the way that you think looks best and or would be approved by the planning commission and the public and the city council and so forth, and your planning director, right? So what this does is that with tools like ArcGIS Urban, we can create multiple types of development in a web-based environment, be able to do analysis with it, understand the metrics of what we're creating, right? If I create a 4-story or a 5-story mixed-use development, what's the difference in the number of households, in the number of office jobs or retail jobs? How much parking do I have to have? If I were to change the zoning so that I got rid of my parking requirements, what would that look like now? What's the impact on utilities, on water, on sewer? What's the impact going to be on traffic? What's it going to cost to build this? What's the potential tax revenue going to be? Again, we're moving away from simple facets of design. GIS allows us to be able to this geographic approach allows us to be able to create these multiple scenarios, 4 or 5 of them, compare them to one another, and then be able to present those back to the stakeholders and say, look, the planning department is recommending scenario 4 because of this, right? Because it's going to add this many households. It's going to create this many affordable units versus market priced units, right? And again, taking that data-driven approach to design. All right, I want everyone to copy this down, and no, I don't. This is not meant to intimidate you, and especially if you're like, I'm not sure about using GIS and you see this and you're scared. That's not the goal, but I want you to understand this, and there is no doubt about this. GIS is transforming how planning is done. And through, if you look on the far right, with AI and machine learning, we just got finished working with the American Planning Association on a paper that's coming out shortly about planners and using AI. That's honestly something that 5 years ago probably wouldn't have thought about delivering that paper. But I can tell you it's going to be really well received. I think there are going to be a lot of people that are drawn to that. Again, we're seeing the pervasiveness of apps, of being able to share services. The importance there is it doesn't matter where the data is, right? Whether I've got it on my machine or if I've got it on our server or in the cloud, it doesn't matter. How do I make it available to others, right? And again, being able to do advanced analytics, not necessarily using a desktop program, but what analytics can I do with my web-based application to answer questions? Okay. So again, there's a lot going on now with GIS, and I love looking at this. It honestly makes me nostalgic when I think about when I started in this field and how a lot of these bubbles were not there. It was very simple, but this really provides a way for planners to be able to leverage tools that help them design the types of communities that their residents really want. And that's and that they really need, and so to me, that's the exciting part about it. I wanted to leave you with this before we open it up to questions. Of course, I talked about the myriad of projects that you and others have probably had to put on the back burner. You would have to be living under a rock to not know about a lot of the programs that are out there, ARPA, the infrastructure bill, and others that are out there. It can be overwhelming. There's no doubt about that. So one of the things that Esri put together was a free resource to be able to understand how you can align your projects with federal stimulus programs. So the URLs for that is at the bottom. It's go.esri.com/stimulus funding. There are a number of different resources there and ideas. One of the best ones that we're going to have this story up very soon on that page. I'll just share this quickly with you. The city of Decatur, Illinois is about 70,000 people, and they had recently done a redevelopment project downtown. Very, very lively area. They've got a lot of activity there. Their outer lying neighborhoods were doing great, but there was a ring kind of in the middle where blight was an issue or was becoming an issue in different neighborhoods. They're using ARPA funding from the Department of Treasury. I'll make sure to provide a link to this story. But they have millions of dollars that they've made available to the public to be able to simply fill out I think it's about a 3 or 4 question survey to be able to identify what they need to be able to improve their property. It could be, I just need a roof repair, or my HVAC system isn't working, or we have flooding issues or drainage issues on our property, things of that nature. They're able to apply that City is using a dashboard to be able to identify where those requests are coming from, and then that money is about to be handed out based on project need. But again, you've got a city that is using federal funding to be able to help mitigate blight, to improve neighborhoods with virtually no out-of-pocket expenses. So anyway, there are more stories like this. We're going to make them available, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware. If you see, yes, we would love to update our comp plan, we would love to update our zoning code, but we just don't have the money. I am telling you this as someone that has gone through these bills. There's money there. And we want to be able to help you find that and find the resources to be able to make that happen. So with that, I will go ahead and provide my contact information here, email address. If you don't mind, feel free to bookmark esri.com/planning. We have lots of resources there, other stories similar to the ones I mentioned with Seattle and Decatur and Tacoma and Charlotte. And hopefully we can get your story up there soon, Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So with that, Michael, I will see what kind of questions we have.
Great, thanks, Keith, and thanks to everybody who has submitted questions so far, and you can continue to submit them, and we'll probably go about 45 minutes today. And as you can imagine, it's a pretty wide-ranging set of questions this day. So let me just start with this one, I guess, and they're in fact just pouring in more as I say that. So we'll start with this one from Brett Afune, who asks, what is the difference between community analyst and business analyst, and who are the intended users for either product?
I'm going to give you the short version of that story. There was a time we started out with business analyst, and then community analyst came out, and the thought was that business analyst would be for the private sector and that community analysts would be for the public sector. As we started working more and more with this, with the data, we found there was so much overlap, and the tools required were about the same. They're essentially the same application. Community analyst has a green interface, and business analyst has a blue interface. So I wish I could tell you there's something more complex there. There's not. We thought that these two would diverge. They've really kind of stayed the same. So if you have one, you have the other. You have access to the same data.
Great, thanks, Keith. So we'll just kind of go through here. It may jump around a little bit topic-wise, but that's just the way the questions are today. Okay. Next question is from one of our colleagues here, Deb Sward, who's asking, what is the best way for organizations to estimate the cost of crowdsourcing planning data, for example, consuming service credits through web applications such as the one that you showed?
So those kinds of applications are really, honestly, are minimal because you're not charged for bandwidth. You're not charged for people going on there and answering a survey. So the service credits are really used when you're using geoprocessing on a server. So in other words, if I got the let's say I got the responses from a survey, and there were 1,000 different surveys and people could identify their locations. If I did not have desktop GIS or didn't want to use this, I can use web-based tools within ArcGIS Online to do some analysis and do some clustering to understand where those responses are coming from. That would use a small amount of credits. But as far as just looking at the answers that people are providing you back, that's bandwidth, and there's no charge for bandwidth. All that being said, we have calculators for that. I wish I knew offhand where they are. But if you search ArcGIS Online, the credit calculator, there's a link to our site where you can actually go through and say, these are the things I want to do. How many credits would that consume?
Okay, thanks, Keith. We've got a couple of questions in this realm. And this one's from Amanda Gatto, who's asking, is there an ArcGIS community engagement for dummies?
No, see, this is what we're trying to avoid. You're not dummies. It's again, I think it's, you know what the way to phrase that is? It's GIS for people that aren't used to desktop GIS. That's all there is to it. So here's the thing. To get up to speed on ArcGIS Online, again, if you've already got a So let's put it this way. If you have a desktop license, you have access, you also have an ArcGIS Online license that comes with it. If your organization has an ArcGIS Online account and you are listed as a named user, you have access to free training for that. There are a number of videos that are online from, if you just go to Esri, there are tons of technical sessions. I would encourage you though to reach out to your account manager because what they can do is they can, whether you've realized it or not, you actually have someone that's assigned to you on our educational services team, on our training team. And for free, they'll put together a training plan for you and just say, okay, this, based on your timeline, you say, Keith, I've got to learn this in 2 months, or I've got to learn this in 2 weeks, or the day before yesterday, right? How do I, what's the training that I need to take? And they are fantastic at this. And you've got a resource then that, again, you can take to your director and so forth and go, you need to leave me alone for a day because I got to go through these classes. But yeah, I would reach out to your account manager. They'll be happy to work with you on that. If you're not sure who your account manager is, or you're not using Esri yet, or what have you, just shoot me an email and I'll figure it out for you.
Great, thanks, Keith. Well, we've gotten several comments asking about the information that John Coleman is sending through the chats, some of which Keith provided to us in advance. So we will be posting that on the webinar archive page. And when you get the email with the link to it after we have finished and post the recording, you can just click through and you'll see that information right there. So a lot of the desire to see those links again, Keith.
Good, glad to hear it.
Okay, and I guess in keeping with what you just said, here's a question from Shelby Hutchinson who says, hey Keith, what's a good app to start with that I can easily use to impress our planning director?
I know Shelby. Well, let's see, it depends whether you want them to just kind of raise their eyebrows and go, that's interesting, or if you want them to fall over in their chair. So depending on the amount of bodily injury that you are fine with there, I would say, again, to me, I always recommend starting out with Community Analyst or the Business Analyst Web App, just because it's so powerful and there's so much data there. Honestly, it's my favorite app that we make. We have stuff that does great things, like I love ArcGIS Urban, I love Hub, but every time I'm in the Business Analyst Web App or Community Analyst, I learn something. And I love using it when we're, like I mentioned at the Florida Planning Conference, we would have people come up and say, I'm from the city of St. Cloud or Port St. Lucie or whatever. Let's find out some information about your community. So I think I would start with that, just because there's so much insight in there. And again, I mentioned that there's the demographic information and there's the, the census numbers. One of the things that we also include with that are current year populations. Those are always updated, usually by mid-May. And then in addition to that, we do 5-year projections as well. And by the way, we make our methodology available. You can go up to the help section, go to data documentation. I'm glad we have very smart people that do this, but it's outlined. So when people go, where'd you get that data? You don't have to say, well, I just came up with it. Nope. Here's where the data came from. Here's the methodology that they use to be able to do, current year estimates and 5-year projections. So that's true for just about all of the census and ACS data. So I'm sorry, that was a long-winded way. Let's say, so to the easiest way, the low-hanging fruit to get would be the Business Analyst Web App, because you just need to have an ArcGIS Online named user. If you've already got that, Business Analyst Web App or Community Analyst is $100 a year. So it's just a subscription. So that's a quick way to get up and running. The other way to make them flip out of the chair would be ArcGIS Urban. There's a little bit more commitment in that, but that's, as I mentioned on that last slide about the geographic approach to planning, is that this really enables the scenario planning. So where I would recommend Urban especially is if you've got again, a comp plan update that's coming soon, or you're looking at reforming zoning, maybe not, we say zoning reform, it always sounds like you're rewriting the entire code. It could just be about updating mixed use or certain types of housing. But if you want to play out the scenarios about what that would look like, what the impact would be in terms of potential population, utility usage, that kind of thing, jobs and so forth, that's where Urban would come into play. So I would say if you were doing that, again, all you have to have for Urban, again, it's ArcGIS Online, it's Urban, And then you just have to start with your parcels and zoning. That's really the key. You can always add contextual data, right? Like transit stops and floodplains and wetlands and whatever else you want. But that's really the core of what you have to have. And then you can play out different scenarios. So you can say, okay, this is our existing zoning for mixed use. If we were to change the density and the allowed uses and the floor area ratio and the maximum building height and go down the list, front, side, and rear setbacks, this is what this building could look like, and here's what the impact would be on my community. Again, you're doing this without, sending anything out to a consultant to change the code. It's just playing out those scenarios ahead of time.
Great, thanks, Keith. Next question here is from Chelsea Albuquerque, who's asking, is there a list of basic tutorials? Also, you mentioned some of the free tools. Is there a list of these as well?
Yeah, so it's kind of general. So let me make sure I want to make sure I'm covering the right ground on this. The first step would be, again, if you've already got ArcGIS software, if you've got Esri software, you can go to esri.com/training and see the training classes and resources that are available to you. Again, the only training that costs any money is the instructor-led. So if you bring an instructor into your office or you're going to a facility, that's the only training that costs anything. Everything else, the web-based modularized courses, lessons, and so forth, those are all free. They're part of your maintenance or part of your subscriptions. So there's no additional cost for that. So I would start at esri.com/training. I would also look at ArcGIS Lessons. So this is a part of training. The reasons why I like lessons is they're very specific case studies. They're much more, to me, they're much more real world, and they're, like I said, they're very specific. And we have dozens and dozens of them. We actually have a couple that deal with the Business Analyst Web App, but it's an opportunity to kind of immerse yourself in a specific project instead of the more generic training, which is this button does this button does this, then you do this, and so forth. So the lessons, ArcGIS lessons, are really useful there. We also have a number of books as well through Esri Press. So if you prefer to work through one of those, we have enormous tutorials about working in desktop, and then working in specific fields like public safety, public works, environmental, and natural resources, and so forth. So there are tons of different resources in that regard. And then again, as far as free data that's available, I would look at the Esri, and you can just search for this, Esri Living Atlas. I think it's just livingatlas.esri.com, but there's a ton of free data that's there that, again, you can view in a viewer there, or bring into your ArcGIS Online project or desktop project as well. And then the curated content that's created from the Living Atlas, that's the Esri maps for public policy, right? So that's esri.com/policy maps. So, and again, that's part of the Living Atlas. So I'm sorry, that was long-winded. I wasn't sure what specific resources. If I did not answer your question specifically, shoot me an email, and we'll find the resource that you need.
Great, thanks, Keith. And John's been sending the links out through the chat as well. So folks who are monitoring that can see those links. Great. Excellent. Okay. Next question here is from Ben Andrea, who asks, do you have to have Arc Pro to do the Esri Academy classes?
So, well, just for only if you want to do the desktop classes, yeah. So, I mean, some of the classes are desktop focused. So yes, you would need the software for that. But many of the classes are also for the web-based courses as well. So again, for that, you would just need to have an ArcGIS Online subscription. So if you see something that's, an academy class for ArcGIS Online, or, ArcGIS Hub and so forth, those just require ArcGIS Online subscriptions, and you don't need Pro. Like, don't tell anyone this, because I work for Esri. This sounds terrible. I don't have ArcGIS Pro on my machine. So, but here's the thing, I don't need it. Like, I've paid my dues. I have digitized plenty of parcels and zoning data and everything else, everything in between. I don't have to do that anymore. I'm really more of a consumer of that data, and the analytics and doing analytics of it. So I just use the web-based application. So if you're just using web-based, you do not need desktop to be able to take the training courses.
Great, thanks, Keith. We'll just keep plowing ahead. And by the way, Ben says we won't tell anyone.
I appreciate it. Good, our secret.
Thanks, Ben. Next one here is from Robert Stanford, who says, what's a good basic level Esri package for doing environmental assessments and maintenance planning of a high quality natural areas for a local preservation and conservation organization?
Wow, okay. So when you get into that kind of detail, you're probably going to need at some point, and maybe not at the outset, a lot of it's you're gonna need ArcGIS desktop probably at that point. Probably just the standard edition is all you would need, because my guess is in that instance you're going to have to create some high quality data in that regard. You're still going to be able to ingest tons of data that's coming from the feds. Again, a lot of that's on the Living Atlas. It's available just through ArcGIS Online that other people have posted. So your most expensive thing there is going to be a desktop standard license. And then depending on the types of analysis that you would need to do, there might be an extension that you might need called Spatial Analyst. There are others that can do, water modeling and so forth. But again, for this, and I'm sure if someone from our environmental and natural resources team is watching this, they're screaming and throwing stuff at the screen right now. So I would just encourage you, feel free to, if you don't know who your account manager is right now, or again, if you haven't started using the software yet, you're just not sure, text me your organization name. I will find who your account manager is, and then who from our environmental and natural resources team could work with you, because I guarantee you they would have additional follow-up questions that I did not think to ask. And they would want to know, and a lot of it's going to be driven by what data do you have and what is it that what you're trying to accomplish, because that's going to create the list of data that you're going to need. And again, either going to need to create yourself or get from a third-party source. I'm sorry, I wish I had a specific answer for that, but the bottom line is we'll get you the information you need for that.
Excellent, thanks. Next question here is from Jennifer Jill Westland, who asks, does Urban include assumptions about infrastructure use, or do you need to have that data?
So for infrastructure use and for all of the metrics there, we provide a standard template, but it's up to you to determine what that template is. In other words, or you can change the variables in that, right? So a certain amount of square footage of medium density residential space uses X amount of gallons per day of water, or creates this many additional trips, or creates this much sewage, or generates this much tax revenue, and so forth. All those metrics you can change the variables to during setup, and change at any time as well that you want to. So we provide templates. You can use what we provide you, or you can enter your own numbers as you see fit. You can create your own custom metrics.
Thanks, Keith. Next question here is from Ryan Faulkner, who asks, does ArcUrban interact with community or business analysts? And is the data being pulled related to the population and jobs and scenarios coming from there?
So yes, we do take in data that is used both. So there is demographic data that's used both in urban and in community analysts. They are meant to work in tandem. So again, we talked about the first step in this process is understanding neighborhood characteristics. And then yes, that same data would be available to you once you're in urban and doing the actual design work.
Okay. Here's another question. Many of the Infrastructure Act funding program applications require an equity analysis. Are there any relevant or specific tools or examples that you could share that could do this?
So that would be, I'm not the most qualified person to answer that one. So again, that would be on our stimulus funding page that I mentioned, go.esri.com/stimulus funding. And then we provide some additional resources there and links where you can ask folks in different in different verticals about that. I'm trying to think if I've come across that just on the planning side. But again, we take you to the links on the grants.gov page for that. I don't have the answer for that though right now.
Got it. Okay.
I just wanted to say no comment. Could I do that? Okay. No,
Sure.
it's too late for that.
You can respond any way you want to.
That's
Okay. Next question here is from Aaron Deem, who asks, are there any tools that incorporate urban biodiversity and nature into the planning process? For example, which bird species use which trees at what time of year, et cetera, or how much ground permeability has it increased or decreased with a proposed project?
So last part first, yes. So it can show the amount of permeability that's changed. So how much new impervious surface are you creating? So that part is definitely done. I would be lying if I told you we've done that kind of analysis with wildlife, and we do have another tool that is used primarily on the environmental natural resources side called Geoplanner, and so I'm sorry, I'm just playing this through in my head. So basically, what you could do is use overlays of where those wildlife like nesting areas and so forth are, and they would be contextual layers within ArcGIS Urban or within Geoplanner. As far as using that for analysis, I don't think Urban would be able to do that right away, but you could certainly do that within ArcGIS Online. Just to be able to show, in fact, I think maybe the way to do this, now that I think about it, would be, okay, show the location. If you've got polygons or points that are showing the locations of wildlife nesting areas that they typically roam, and certain trees, which again, if you've got mapped, you can do that. You can actually run the analysis so that if you said, okay, these areas of trees near this park are nesting areas for these types of birds. They're endangered. We need to make sure they're protected. We can use ArcGIS Online or desktop, of course, to be able to create a certain size buffer around that. You can then take that buffer and put that into ArcGIS Urban. So now that my planners, who may not have known any, like me, did not know anything about those specific types of birds, now I've got that as a contextual layer for my developments, and I can make sure that's essentially an exclusionary zone. I don't impede or within a certain area of that buffer. So yes, you could use it to be able to be a part of the design process, but as far as like a wildlife analysis and so forth, I would say that's not in Urban per se, but it is in ArcGIS Online, which you have to be able to use Urban. Was that confusing enough? That was.
We'll see if
Okay.
they post any response to that.
Just a big what. So.
Sure. Okay. Here's a question from outside the US from Steve Mark, who asks, is there base map data available in Canada for community analyst and ArcGIS Urban?
So for community analysts, yes. So we have, I forget the number of countries that are available, but Canada is definitely one of them. I want to say there's well over 100 country or data for countries that we have. Of course, it varies from country to country. It's been a while since I looked at Canada's data, but there is quite a bit there. So as far as working in community analysis, you can change your country at any point in the top right-hand corner. And use your country's data there. Urban is different because Urban is using your local data, right? So Urban works off the premise of your parcel data and your zoning data. And all you're doing is you're providing pointers to those services, right, as web services. So that's just using your local data. But yes, community analysts, business analysts, web app, they do have Canadian data.
Thanks, Keith. We'll keep it on the international tip at this point because we have a question from Finland, actually,
okay.
From Samuel Tuovinen, who was saying, in Finland, we will have legislation basically dictating the use of GIS and standard layer names. For example, et cetera, in general zoning, for example, planning new homes for 10,000 or more people. Is there or will there be something similar in the US? And he adds, currently each planner uses GIS as he or she pleases. The goal of the legislation is to make it easier to use different GIS files and plans, not just PDFs.
So I love hearing that. That's fantastic. That certainly is going to optimize data management and analysis, because it's going to make it easier to be able to analyze that data. Oh, I can tell you now, and I'm sure there were other people here in the US that heard that, like, oh, wishful thinking. No, we have many counties where the municipalities can't agree on the data formats. So to get that nationally, probably not, but that not all counties are that way. I shouldn't frame it that way, but you know, we are seeing cooperation at a better level. So I don't think legislation is necessarily going to happen, but we're seeing this like at Southern California Association of Governments at SCAG. They have what's called an RDP. It's a regional data platform, and basically what it is a way for the dozens and dozens of municipalities to be able to share their local data, specifically zoning and land use data, so that if you are a neighboring municipality or you're 2 cities over or something like that, you can actually see what that municipality has in terms of their zoning, what it looks like, how they name it and so forth. So things like that can help move towards standardization, where you're seeing more of a regional approach. And so things like that are much more encouraging. And honestly, I think that approach is much more likely to bear fruit than legislation, at least in the US. But we are starting to see that more at the regional government level, which is where I started. I love seeing where regional governments are working with the municipalities in that regard and as service providers. So.
Great, thanks, Keith. Next question here is, if you know the quality of your data is old or likely inaccurate, how have you seen crowdsourced information being used to help improve the quality of the data presented in your GIS tools?
Well, and I think that's what the city of Tacoma did, right? I think they, instead of working off the presumption that the data that they had was, it was authoritative, but there's a difference between authoritative and flawless, right? And up to date, right? As you mentioned. So I think, that's where the crowdsourcing came into play, because honestly, the resources that it would take a city the size of Tacoma to be able to go out there and field truth all of their assumptions they don't have that. It's just not there. And that was all pre-pandemic too. So certainly now they wouldn't have the resources for that. That's the benefit of crowdsourcing the data. And again, when you're able to analyze where that data is coming from, right? It helps when you have, sometimes we think repetitive data, we're taught in GIS management, the repetitive data is bad, it's terrible. I'll tell you what, when you've got a crowdsourced data and you've got 5 people on a corner saying, this house is dilapidated and so forth, you know what? I don't have to drive out there to see it. I bet you there's a house that's dilapidated. And so the crowdsourcing aspect of it helps, provide a greater level of field truth than again, relying on older data. So again, I think that the sort of the side effect, the benefit of that approach also is, guess who feels more involved? Guess who feels like their planning department or their city cares about what they think? It's the residents in that neighborhood. It's harder to say at that point, now, well, my city doesn't care about this neighborhood. No, yeah, they do. They just sent on an app and they've now recorded all of your insight into what needs to change within that neighborhood. And now you can see that reflected in their updated housing policy. So again, that's why we use the term civic inclusion. It's getting more and more people involved in that process. Crowdsourcing is not flawless. So don't listen. You've got people with too much time on their hands. So I don't know a nice way to say that, and don't always put in accurate data. But again, if the alternative is you're sending your own folks out to field truth stuff that you feel is old and outdated, I would start with crowdsourcing. So.
Great, thanks, Keith. Our next question is from Virginia McDonald. She says, I'm very curious about the integrated use of desktop and online apps. I love the control and operation of the desktop app for the work of visual cartography and editing the data, and then publishing finished map layers to online maps.
Yep.
As a grad student in the middle of a GIS certificate, what balance of training time should I split between learning desktop skills versus app skills?
So I mentioned we were at the Florida Planning Conference last week, and one of the things that's indicative of every APA conference, whether it's national or state, lots of students, way more students at these types of conferences than any other conference I go to, which is good. It's interesting kind of getting their insight. And that question I must have gotten at least eight or nine times just from different students. I would say this, and so let me say this in context. Our educational services teams are working with universities right now to help update their curriculum to address this. I think learning desktop is great. If again, we're talking about folks in planning, I think learning desktop is great because it's an opportunity to see, really see the gears of the machine and how it works and what it can do, and understanding the, what it takes to make good data and the types of analysis that you can do with it. I think understanding that really only comes from desktop. So from that standpoint, I think it's very useful. And so I would certainly spend time in terms of understanding spatial analysis and data creation on the desktop side. That's what you need to come away with. That being said, the reality is that for a lot of planners, especially new planners coming into an organization, they may not have a desktop license for you. Or they may not want to purchase it, or that you may not have a machine that can run it. We see that a lot. With the latter, we see a lot. That's why I think it's important to be able to understand, okay, what can I do with this authoritative data that someone else creates? Because what we've seen as a trend over the last, and this is not recent, over the last 20 years, is that more and more, especially at the municipal and the county level, is GIS is being housed under IT rather than under, again, for the whole city, rather than under planning or public works or utilities. Because when it's housed under planning or public works or utilities, planning, public works, and utilities get all the focus. When it's under IT, it's just seen as a business system. It's a mission critical business system, but it's seen as a business system that serves everyone. So what you have in those situations is you have GIS professionals who are well versed in this. They're creating authoritative data, they're creating beautiful maps, and then they can publish them to the web, where you as the planner can then go in and consume them just to be able to, do searches, to be able to do some additional analysis online and so forth. But again, the analysis comes from knowing which tools to use, and a lot of that comes from learning the desktop side of things. So use the desktop to understand what you can do with the data and how the data needs to be created, but just understand your end use very well could be on the website, and there is nothing wrong with that, because I think as we've shown, there is a great deal that you can do that can address your daily workflows in that environment.
Great, thanks Keith, and thanks everybody submitting the questions. You can still use the questions tab to submit more. We have a few more minutes to go through the more questions. Next one here is from Marion X, who says, given the impacts of historic inequities and racism on land use patterns, I have concerns that GIS analysis could reflect the same problems surfacing in other data tools, that algorithms are analyzing data biased by systemic racism and produce biased results. How can planners and other decision makers account for this, and what is Esri and APA doing to address it?
So let's start with the data aspect of it first. The data is only going to, yes, you can change your algorithms and so forth, and those can certainly be altered, but I think one of the best assaults against inequity is data analysis, because you can easily show, and again, authoritatively show, where resources are needed and where they're lacking, and what the impact of those lack of resources is causing, right? And I think that's GIS can help show that. As far as what Esri is doing, we have a separate team, our racial equity team, that is integrated into different facets of the work that we do. We have applications that are geared specifically towards that. And I think if you just wanted to search Esri, John, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to look the link for the Esri racial equity, we can put that link in there, but there are resources that are available there. Again, to help make sure that the analysis that is done is fair and that it is balanced and that it is coming from, again, no skewing of the data. That's really going to be the key. So, and again, this is something that's important to APA as well. We work very closely with them, and so you know, we have regular cadences with them when we went over the resources that we were implementing. And good, the links there in the chat. They're really happy to see that, and of course, this is something that they're working on as well. Of course, they're looking at it more on the you know, on the front line of things in terms of from a planning standpoint. We're looking at it from the data analysis that is going to drive what kind of changes need to be made within cities. I'll give you a very quick example. I'm not going to name the city, but it was a coastal city that brought in one of our business partners to do some analysis. They were concerned that their biggest problem in the coming years was going to be sea level rise. This company came in again, used GIS, used you know, authoritative data and analysis, and came back with a report months later that said, you do have to worry about sea level rise in about 2050, 2055. That's when you have to start worrying about it. Here's the analysis that we did. Your biggest problem is that you have disadvantaged neighborhoods that are getting flooded on a regular basis. You have disadvantaged neighborhoods that don't have access to parks and to other resources. You have disadvantaged neighborhoods that aren't getting their fair shake of capital improvement projects, right? So you had elected officials that, again, had a preconceived notion about this is what our most pressing problem is. And GIS came in and said, yes, that is a problem, but it's down the road. Here's your biggest problem right now, and here's how you're not serving all of your residents. And again, that helped them sort of turn their, like, oh, wait a minute, we need to do this. So again, I understand where you're coming from on the GIS side. Any data, you know, can be manipulated, but that's a two-way street. And again, you can tell the truth with the data as well, and be able to show, again, where resources are needed. So.
Great. Thanks, Keith. We'll have a few more questions before we wrap up here. Next question here is from Alicia Cates, who asks, can data generated from drone flights be integrated into these applications?
Yes. Yeah, so there are applications, there are ones like drone to map and so forth that have been used for a while to be able to take drone footage, excuse me, and then be able to mosaic those into actual live imagery. So we've seen this where, again, folks will, or city or county will have aerial photography that may have been provided by the county when the tax assessor was having the county flown. There's a new subdivision now that's coming in. And so they can actually use drone footage to be able to take that imagery, and then again, using the imagery tools within, this is well, actually you can do some of this online as well. But you can certainly do it on the desktop side where you can mosaic the new photos on top of the old ones and then be able to still keep the old ones so that you can see sort of a time-based approach to see, okay, how did this area look in 2018, 2019, 2021, and so forth. So yes, drone imagery is absolutely, can absolutely be integrated directly into imagery, and very quickly too. This is not a lengthy process.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more here. Next one here is from another one of our colleagues. Not to create a spoiler for the APA article coming up, but how do you see AI being used in GIS in the coming years? And what would you suggest for state and local governments to do to get ready for the use of AI in GIS?
Let's see. Well, I think when we're talking AI, a lot of it from our standpoint, from a again, I'm the group that was this working group there was academics. There were also some planning directors on there and so forth, and me and my colleague Natalie Veal um, were on this. So I say all that so that you don't think this was the Keith Cooke show, and but it was not. But I think in terms of AI, one of the things that we can certainly use is to be able to identify trends over time, especially in terms of things like traffic patterns. And when I say traffic, I don't just mean vehicles, I mean bikes, I mean people. How are parking spaces used? Where will we need other parking spaces down the road? Based on patterns of flooding, what would that look like in terms of if we had 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year flood, who would be impacted by those? What would be the potential need for housing if we were to grow at this certain rate over time? And what would that make our downtown area look like? What would that make our outlying neighborhoods look like? What would the impact be on traffic, on transit, and so forth? I think AI is going to be one of those things it's going to mean something different to a lot of different planning departments and the ways that they're going to use it. But in a very real sense, I think many of them are using it now and may not be may not be aware of it. But they're basically what the tools. I think the overarching theme I think for AI and planning is using AI to ask questions about the trends that we can see now and how it's going to influence our future, and where we mentioned this before in the previous discussion. Where are we lacking resources now? Where are we going to be lacking resources in 4 to 5 years if these growth trends continue? If it's the opposite direction, right, we start to see a decrease, where is that going to cause the most amount of problems? So again, there's not one silver bullet that just says, hey, yes, AI for planning is this, but the bottom line is that it's much more accessible now. And again, selfishly, I look at it through the prism of geography as well. Like, where do we plug that in and make sure that we're taking a geographic approach to AI? That'll be the next session. No, um, so again, that's part of what the paper will go over. By the way, talking about the racial equity side, that was one of the discussions that we had in there, is making sure that, okay, how can planners ensure that the algorithms that they are using are fair? Because AI is just going to tell you information based on the algorithm that you put in. So how can you make sure, how can planners make sure that the algorithms that they are using are telling the correct story, right? So there's your preview.
Okay. In fact, we got a question kind of to that effect here from Jason Hercules asking, how do the Esri platforms account for the various algorithm assumptions within the same project for all the differences assumed across different populations?
Yeah, so within our framework, we refer to it as GeoAI. Again, obviously we're biased. We're looking at it from a geographic standpoint. That's really a much lengthier discussion, but I mean, I think that within AI, the thing that's important is understanding that you have to have some control over the algorithms, or at the very, very least, a detailed understanding of the assumptions that the algorithm is using, the data that it's getting that from, right? And the reason I mention that is because I've seen lots of projects, not non-AI related. I've seen lots of projects where people worked off legacy data or non-authoritative data. They worked off data that was not that was not the gospel for that city. And you can come up with flawed analysis. A lot of that has to do with data management, which is another discussion. But I think the key for AI is understanding, as I mentioned, it is not just a snap your finger kind of tool. It is incredibly powerful, but if you don't have understanding about the inner workings and where the data is coming from and the assumptions that it's making it can cause more damage than it can cause good. So I don't mean to be a downer on that part of it, but it's, I mean, that's one of the things that we, that we highlight in that report, is that you have to have an understanding of that before you use these tools.
Well, as you noted, I think this may be a good topic for a future webinar to look at some of those questions.
Yeah.
And speaking of questions, I'll ask you one last one. Thanks for taking all the time to answer all these. And as always, we never get to them all. So thanks to everybody who submitted them. This one's from Stephanie Weigel, who asks, as a GIS professional who has taken much of the last decade off to attend to family needs, what is the best way to get back up to speed with the web-based and other apps being used in community planning?
So again, I would say, this goes back to what we discussed before, is your best resource right now, if you just want to do this on the web, if you don't want to, call your account manager or things of that nature, that approach, esri.com/training. And then you can actually, in the search window, kind of type out what you're interested in learning about. Like there, you can just say community planning. But I would really encourage you to reach out to us, because what we can do, like I said, we've got great folks on the educational services team that can listen to what you're trying to do and then interpret that, translate that into a training plan that, again, you've got documented, and you can just kind of follow as a checklist and kind of go through there and take it at your own pace. And especially if you're in a working environment, I found this especially true when I was on the account management side, is a really useful tool for your boss, because it's not you going to the boss and saying, I need to take this training class. It's, here's this document that I was given from Esri that says, I need to do these. I've done these 3. I need time to do these, 4, 5, and 6. And when I'm done, here's what the end result will be. To me, that's the benefit of those training plans, is they have a detailed goal, or they have a goal and they provide the details about how to get there. So if you don't know who your training person is or your account manager, just shoot me an email. I will help you find who that is, and we'll get someone in touch with you to help put that training plan together.
Great, thanks, Keith, and thanks for taking all the time to answer all these questions. We'll share the rest with you from our reports, and then, as always, we have posted your contact information so folks can also contact you directly. But just to wrap up, we wanted to just give you a minute or two to give us some kind of closing thoughts and takeaways.
Well, like I said, I think, to me, this is a really exciting time for planning, because I think about when I first started, and the way that planners use GIS is they would lean over my shoulder and point down and say, change that to a lighter color of yellow. I don't want to tell you how many trees died at my hands from printing out the wrong map, or a map that didn't have the right shade for low density residential. And thinking about where we were then to where we are now, to where you can have planners that have the subject matter expertise and understand the vision for what they have for their city or for their county or for community specific neighborhoods, now have the tools to be able to do this themselves. And again, to be able to use the data and the content and the analysis that comes from the GIS professionals, but they don't necessarily have to be a GIS professional themselves. I personally love seeing that, because I think it just opens so many doors for planning professionals to be able to, again, do the kind of work that sometimes would get tabled because they had to wait for an opening in the GIS manager or the GIS technician's schedule. Nope, I can do this myself, and I can play out multiple scenarios, and I can put this in front of my planning commission and my city council and county commission and say, this is why we need to do this, right? And it can, again, we can have this 3D immersive experience. It's just, the tools that are available and the analysis that's available now is so far ahead of where we were just even 10 years ago. It is really, and I hate to use this, such a cliched word, but it's really inspiring to see this. And when I go to, this is conference season for APA state chapters. I've already been to one. I'm heading to Texas and Montana, and a couple of others. It is really inspiring to see planners, and they come up to the booth and say, I'm doing this with GIS now. And I think, every time I think, yeah, you know what, you wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, and now you can. And so to me, that's To me, that's one of the most inspiring things about what's going on in the field now.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us where things stand with these platforms, and I'm sure look forward to working with you again in future webinars. With that, we're going to conclude our webinar, The Importance of a Geographic Approach to Planning. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Keith Cooke for a great presentation, to everyone who attended today, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who helps to make this all happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org. Also, for those of you who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email if you need this certificate to claim other continuing education credits. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. And finally, keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars. And as you can see on the screen, we have a lot of programming coming up, including how zoning broke the American city and how to fix it with Nolan Gray, which is going to be this Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern. We also have Rural Renaissance, revitalizing America's hometowns through clean power, which will be next Tuesday, September 20th. So please look for an email on that, as well as Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future with the American Farmland Trust on September 29th, and the annual Walktober Walk-in-Our series with the Maryland Department of Transportation in October. All that information is available on smartgrowth.org. With that, thank you for being with us, and have a great day.